When she entered, they didn't even raise their heads. Just another black woman wearing tan trousers and a black shirt, no badge, no danger. One of the officers yawned, one more coffee slurp. Additionally, the third guessed the janitor's late again, said Officer Kellen, gesturing to her shoes. Easy, loud, and all too familiar laughter ensued. She continued to walk, serene, still, observing everything. Nobody gave assistance. Nobody inquired about her name. However, as she arrived at the corridor, she was interrupted by Kellen outside the main office. He said, "You lost, sweetheart?" Stepping right in front of her. "This ain't the courthouse, and we don't do walk-ins." She said nothing. His breath was heavy with conceit as he leaned closer. "Unless you are here to post your son's bail." This time, what did he do? What? Little cannabis in car stereo, a silent pause. She blinked once. She said, "Excuse me?" in a quiet, nearly courteous voice. That was sufficient. He grinned broadly. "You heard me, don't act naive. We are aware of how quick hands, no records, and a big mouth when caught are how you guys work." Another officer laughed from the break room. "Most likely stole that blouse as well." She didn't recoil or take a step back. She just gave him a quick glance in the eye, then continued to walk after saying, "Thank you for your honesty." However, Kellen was finished. He yelled, "Hey," loud enough for the others to recognize. "Get her! Get out of here before she requests." A supervisor, or worse, submits one of those civil rights complaints. After one final chuckle, a paper cup was thrown by someone other than her. It ricocheted off Thua and poured cold coffee all over her shoulder. She stopped. Only for a moment. Long time for the embarrassment to sink in. Long enough for your mental camera to focus on that instance in which a professional adult woman was publicly humiliated within the same structure that was intended to keep the populace safe. She continued to remain silent since, in less than 20 minutes, the same men who made fun of her would be confronting a podium in the briefing room. Additionally, at that podium will be the recently hired chief of the Coldwater Police Department, Chief Amara Lewis. This corrupt, unaccountable precinct was led by the first black woman. A precinct where racial profiling is pervasive, allegations of excessive force and internal cover-ups disguised as policy. She hadn't arrived to be welcomed. She came to hear, to watch, to reveal she had seen enough already. Justice was not on the horizon. It waits already inside the structure, observing and making notes. And when it did say something, it wouldn't request quiet. Accountability would be required. And Coldwater would always remember the person who entered, there. Doors, fully in charge, unarmed. And without an invitation. It was obvious to Chief Amara Lewis what sort of department she had entered. She had smelt it and seen it. As soon as she entered through the side door, she sensed it in her skin. No acknowledgement, no eye contact, just that heavy, musty atmosphere of unbridled authority and casual brutality. Coldwater PD was not simply malfunctioning. It was sure of its decay. And in silence, that confidence just increases. That was the reason she kept her identity a secret. Not quite yet. Announcements allowed individuals to get ready. Amara desired to witness the unvarnished, unpolished version of the truth, since the only thing more the culture that supports police wrongdoing behind closed doors is far more destructive. She strolled the hallways by herself, allowing the structure to speak through faded walls and fractured tiles, posters from long-defunded campaigns, images of police personnel shaking hands with mayors with captions like "her service and integrity." A fragile irony. In each hallway, she reverberated with a past that did not include those who resembled her. And in values as well as color. It was not deserved to be a leader in areas like Coldwater. It was cherished, preserved, and inherited. Like a family. Company, decades of uncontested rule have left a legacy of impunity. She stopped for a moment at the operations board, where the assignments for the day were scrawled in blue marker. Halts in traffic, patrol rotations, and narcotics. Sweeps. She looked at one line. Regular identity verifications. Marlin and Westwood. She primarily knew the impoverished side of town and that intersection. Residents who are Latino and black. There was never a normal ID check in a facility like that. It was a silent system, a code dot of targeting without a warrant. Low visibility. Police that destroys lives yet doesn't make headliness only reference at a time. Racial profiling under the guise of policy, Amara entered the break room down the hall. 3 white officers and 4A clipboard, a couple of men, and a blonde woman. As soon as she walked in, the laughter stopped. One of them raised his head, irritated by the disruption. The rest remained silent as they observed her. She simply walked to the door without saying hello, poured half a cup of coffee from the machine and stood quietly, listening. Silence teaches. More than words. She learnt that from her father a long time ago. Finally, officer number 3 shattered the silence. You know something about this, then? He spoke in a flat, laced with suspicion comes the phony friendship. Simply nodding, she answered, "Just observing today," was sufficient for them to disarm. She didn't appear menacing. She managed to remain unseen in this way. She collected in. This manner everything. She had already noticed 4 warning signs in less than half an hour inside the facility. 1, disparaging before they realized the new diversity hire was present, they were making whispered comments about her. 2, a sergeant on patrol disregarding a complaint from a junior officer over the use of force during a foot chase the previous week. 3, a whiteboard with the words "despite being prohibited in the majority of states," quote, "goals for citations," was still in place. 4, and possibly the most telling, the quiet of those behind sealed doors remained silent despite knowing better. Her phone buzzed once in the room as she was leaving in her pocket. Her liaison at the Department of Justice's Civil Rights section sent the coded communication. Only 3 eyes on chilly water, words, she didn't respond, she didn't have to. That message had been developing for years. Next, Amara passed through. The holding wing of the precincts. Scratched walls, empty cells, and a bleach odor that lingered, along with an older aroma reminiscent of shattered spirits and old sweat. The type of setting where Tallis finished without a word. A laminated list of force applications was displayed on one wall, rules, it appeared undamaged. The locked filing cabinet is a prop. She already knew that behind it were 2 years' worth of misconduct reports, the most of which had been lost in change after the previous chief's sudden retirement 6 months ago. That was no haphazard retirement. It was Ashield. Thomas Glay, the former head of Coldwater, had resigned just before a federal audit was due. No goodbye ceremony, no media, simply disappeared. Amara, however, understood why. An unnamed 2 weeks earlier, a whistleblower had named 5 policemen in a federal complaint for misrepresenting ingress logs and establishing proof. It was illegal in addition to being unethical. Amara was dispatched by the DOJ to covertly destroy a system, not to cover a vacancy. She had no intention of playing chess. Her purpose was to change the situation. Unsurprisingly, the evidence locker was left unattended as she proceeded towards it. The logbook was messy and scribbled. Whole chunks are absent, her Gazesh rank. She made notes in her head. Cases might arise if chain of custody logs were missing. Be thrown or contested. It went beyond simple carelessness. It was insolence masquerading as sabotage. The kind of strategy that gives filthy cops carte blanche and leaves victims with no options. Corruption in the police doesn't wear a uniform at all times. It occasionally leaves a paper trail that is invisible. She went back outside into where she heard footsteps. In the main hallway. Officer Luis Martinez, a Puerto Rican in his mid-30s, was there. With shoulders that sagged from years of being cautious and eyes that darted too fast. For a moment their gazes locked. After he paused, he gave a subtle nod. It was evident to her that he recognized something, or in her stance, or in her quiet. Some people have a keen sense of purpose. Away. Only when it finally speaks do others notice. Louise remained silent. However, as he passed her, he said in a barely audible whisper, "Be careful, not all poison's loud." There was no warning. It served as a lifeline. A soft indication from a person on the edge, awaiting approval to cease living and begin rebelling. As soon as Amara entered, the intercom buzzed overhead in the administration wing. A male, monotonous voice. Weary, she turned slowly and said, "All units to the briefing room, 10 minutes." The time had come. The expressions on her face observed her being made fun of, questioned, and degraded. Before long, they would discover precisely who they had disregarded and what she had come to do. For years, Coldwater Police Department's briefing room had remained unchanged. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like dying hornets, mismatched chairs, a wall-mounted flag that is deteriorating at the corners, and a lopsided whiteboard with faded marker marks. However, currently, the space would transform into a chamber of reckoning. Officers arrived, casually holding coffee mugs, the sound of their obscene comments still reverberating in the corridor. The woman was standing quietly by the side door, but most of them didn't even see her. Those that did just gave her the cert. A look you give a temp or a caretaker? Captain Ray Brewer made a call order in the room. Brewer was red-faced, stocky, and at ease in his position of authority. He didn't even try to hide the disdain in his voice. His tone was calm when he said, "All right, folks. I know this is short notice, but we've got a special visitor today." Dismissive, almost theatrical, as if he were introducing a person he didn't believe would be important. "A few of you might have heard the person appointed to succeed Chief Grelly is present now." A ripple of murmurs. A few people looked around. Nobody gave a clap. Some grinned. At that moment, she came forward. Amara took a gradual, methodical step, setting the department seal, stamped in gold, is displayed in a compact black folder on the podium. When the room fell silent as she raised her head, not because they knew who she was, but rather because the rhythm of the room was broken by something in her presence. She glanced around the room, stopping deliberately on thefaces that, just an hour before, had made fun of her. Kellen's smile vanished in front of it. Finished. Officer Daniels, the one who had whispered about her clothing in the break room, swallowed hard. "Amara Lewis is my name," she added elegantly, "and I am your new head of police as of this morning." Quietness, pure and punishing. A full second went by, then two, and then there was a noticeable change in the room, chairs groaning beneath weight. No one knew they were bearing, gaze flashing, back straightening. Amara did not flinch. "Let me say something before I start. I arrived here in silence. I didn't enter the room with press or cameras. I didn't ask for your time. I just watched. Additionally, what I saw in this facility in the first hour was not only disheartening, but also illuminating." She spoke clearly, even, but underlying it was something steel, from improper behavior in common spaces to overt racial profiling. That is classified as standard practice to a flagrant disrespect for professional decorum on boards for assignments. Such departments are not new to me. I've taken them apart. Previously. However, she pointed to the room. "This is distinct since some of you honestly think nobody is looking." She hesitated long enough to allow that to fall. "I've perused the internal affairs documents. I am aware of the cases that were quietly resolved. I am aware of the distinction between errors in the field and abuse trends. When I was harassed in your group," she glanced straight towards the back row and laughed. "Own lobby 25. Minutes prior." The policeman felt a glimmer of recognition. Kellen moved around in his chair. Others looked about, measuring responses, figuring out the temperature. Amara, however, didn't wait for them to settle in. "Just because I'm wearing a badge doesn't mean you have to respect me. You shall honor the community, the oath, and the position you pledge to keep safe. Trust from the public is not guaranteed. You have to earn it. Additionally, this department currently lacks that confidence." One more pause. The folder then opened. "I'm holding a draft audit report from the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. It contains formal grievances from the previous 3 years. Complaints that were never addressed, handled improperly, or were buried. It also consists of information from the arrest and citation records for this precinct. Evidence of statistically indisputable prejudice in the way that law enforcement is applied according to neighborhood, income, and race. The space became more constrained. There was a cough. The cop carefully uncrossed his arms. Captain Brewer tightened his jaw. He was aware just what this was, and he had lost control. Amara went on. Allow me to be flawless. Evident. This speech has nothing to do with the new sheriff in town. This concerns equal protection under the law and accountability. The law and completely revamping this department. There are too many of you who are corrupt, but not all of you are accomplice, and today is the last day of that. Officer Louise stood at the side of the room. Gradually and silently. Chief Lewis said, "Enough noise for everyone to listen. I agree with you if you're sincere about wanting to change." Only one voice could be heard, however something changed. While some officers glanced down, others hardly gave a nod. Noticeable but genuine. Amara nodded subtly at him. A little fissure has appeared in the wall. The old guard, however, was difficult to fold. When Kellen did speak, his voice tight with anger that is hardly under control. So what? Enter here and read some statistics. And believe you are familiar with this area? You are unfamiliar with the streets? You have no idea what life is like outside? Amar didn't turn away. You're correct. I have no idea how it feels to stop someone for having a broken tail light and conclude the encounter with lost video and an injured jaw. I have no idea what it's like to refer to harassment as routine. However, I do recognize this. If you require unrestricted authority in order to feel secure at work, you're in it defending anyone. The insignia was never intended for you, and you're defending yourself. For that. She moved out from in front of the podium. You won't serve at all if you can't serve with honor. Internal examinations start this week. Reports of use of force will be examined on an individual basis going forward, and each officer in character as well as performance will be assessed in this category. There was silence in the room, not out of terror but in insight. I didn't come here to, Amara murmured, casting one more glance across the room. Make friends. I'm here to change things, and it's up to you whether or not that includes you. After that, she left. The department did not fall apart behind her, not quite yet. However, something had changed. Additionally, even a tiny change like one sincere voice in a room full of silence is the first step towards change. Within Coldwater PD, the following 72 hours were like being in a glass-enclosed chamber right before a blast. Tense, quiet, one mistake might ruin everything. Officers did not joke. They whispered. Doors that formerly remained silently closed after being propped open. Patrol rotations shifted, but the spirit was distinct. In addition to anxiety and paranoia, Chief Amara Lewis moved through it all calmly, steadily, and precisely, like a knife. She was not raised by her voice. She didn't have to. She was benefiting from the silence. The initial point just after 9 a.m. on Thursday, the department's internal review committee, which was personally selected by Amara and arrived unexpectedly. After being flown in from out of state, 2 former federal investigators, 1 data analyst, and 1 lawyer with experience in cases involving police accountability, they didn't come and watch. They arrived for the audit. Each container, each police vehicle, each within the recent 2 years, a solitary use of force report was filed. There was no mistaking the message. This had stopped being as usual. This was a serious police accountability probe. The first blow came at midday. Officer Kellen's registered cruiser was found to have a second unauthorized body and an unlogged burner phone. Cam, one that isn't connected to the department's database. When asked, he asserted that was to protect oneself. However, when reviewing the video, it revealed severe off-the-record stops. There are no filed citations or documents, yet there are unmistakable pictures of intimidating techniques, unlawful searches, and human rights abuses discovered in his personal store. Amara made no hesitation. She gave Kellen a suspension without pay. More inquiry, and had his locker shut in accordance with chain of custody guidelines. She only met his gaze once he barged into her office, demanding an explanation, and stated, "When compromise with wrongdoing." She went back to her documents. Internally, the second flashpoint appeared. Once too terrified, Officer Luis Martinez gave Amara a flash disk and started talking. No words or hoopla, just a slight nod in the corridor. That evening in her office, she looked over the contents. The documents contained WhatsApp images of officers. making fun of residents' names, audio recordings of exchanges in the locker room. The picture of the evidence room key left unattended in a supply closet with a timestamp of 2 hours is the most damning. Prior to the unexplained disappearance of a well-known case file. It was more than carelessness. It was deliberate carelessness, a pattern of at least 5 senior officers obstructing the course of justice. Amara didn't make any news or announcements. However, 3 fresh names were revealed by morning. Added to the list of suspensions. Sergeant Dunlap, one of them, was formerly a candidate for the role she currently holds. Held. He mumbled to a friend as he crumpled the letter containing his notice. Amara thought, "No," but a fellow cop said, "We're being hunted. Not pursued, exposed." However, the third and possibly most intense encounter was a surprise. Kira, a young mother and community member, entered the station holding a file folder in one hand and her daughter in the other. She didn't request a meeting time. She requested the chief. She was received in the lobby by Amara, just eye contact and room to be heard, without a uniform or guards. Kira opened the folder using hands that are shaking. It had pictures of bruises, a police report with everything, a handwritten letter from her 10-year-old daughter, with portions blacked out, detailing how a man in blue called her mother a liar and shoved her out onto the pavement. Subject resisted during wellness was the title of the report. Check. But there was only trauma, fear, and lack of wellness or resistance. Misuse of power that had been ignored for months. At first, Amara remained silent. She simply gave a slow nod. Scanning the papers, she then posed a single query. "Can you recall the officer's badge name?" Kira paused. She murmured that it was Brewer. "Brewer, Ray, Brewer, Captain Ray." The same individual had presented Amara as though she were merely another official. The same individual who had opposed each change in policy in her first week, Amara had floated. The same man whose identity was now buried in a closed misconduct report for absence of proof. Amara's voice was quiet but confident as she glanced up at Kira. "You did. She meant it when she came here. And it was the correct thing." She convened an emergency command staff meeting that afternoon. Brewer arrived late, his jaw clenched and shoulders squared. He was sitting right across from Amara, grinning like a man who still felt that she was temporary and that this was temporary as well. She moved the folder to the other side of the table. "Your name was used to file this." He looked through it without admiration. One another inflated assertion. "You are aware of how these folks get." Amara folded her hands and leaned forward. "Repeat." "That," he blinked. "Please pardon me." "She," I said. Repeated. "Repeat that. To my face, say these folks in this room once more." There was a chilly quiet. Nobody made a move. Nobody blinked. Brewer stopped grinning. Amara interrupted. "Didn't mean exactly what you said. And the issue is that," then she got up, "this division is no longer a stronghold of egos that are shielded. Bullies with badges are not welcome at this country club. This is a public institution. And people are observing." That night, Brewer was relieved of his duties. Only a sentence, no press releasing the report for the morning. A suspension is in place while a formal investigation is conducted, however, the reverberation throughout the station was overwhelming. The leadership transition that had begun quietly has now become an aggressive reckoning, and it was now very difficult for those who had before made fun of her presence to laugh. By the precinct was a shadow of its former glory by the conclusion of that week. The jokes about coffee had vanished. The arrogant teasing supplanted by quiet discussions in corners and sidelong glances. Amara didn't require no need to threaten, just yell. The reality was loud enough already. Officers who shuffled instead of strutting. People who had previously smirked at her were now completely avoiding eye contact. However, fear didn't interest Chief Lewis. She was pursuing something even more harmful to traditional society, modification ground in reality. Nestled within a brown manila envelope, the fourth explosion occurred in silence. Something showed up late Friday night on Amara's desk. No fingerprints, no name, only one label written in black ink. "Take a look." Within a USB peripheral and A3 words scrawled in all uppercase on a folded piece of paper. She watched the video by herself from inside. There was more than just misbehavior. There was a plot. Security footage that was grainy revealed two officers, whose identities were eventually verified as Officer Byers and Deputy Rowland, resealing the boxes after taking drugs out of the evidence and replacing them with baking powder. 6 months ago. The case, a trafficking bust, served as a publicity stunt. Triumph in a year with elections. Because the evidence was handled improperly, charges were withdrawn. The reality, however, was worse. It had been deliberate. Fraud, theft, tampering, hindrance of the legal system. Even worse, there was an internal shot at the end of the video. Captain Brewer himself meets with a man in plain clothes in the precinct's basement garage and gives him a box. The voice on the audio was clearly his, but the image wasn't very clear. Inform Kellen that the cargo is covered. Now go away. Amara let out a slow breath. The internet was more expansive than she pondered. That same evening, she made an appointment for a closed door or emergency call with the Department of Justice. Given the results and the mounting list of internal infractions her team has discovered, the case would now be escalated to multi-federal supervision of the agency. The review of Coldwater PD was ended. It was situated Bennett Federal Inquiry on Civil Rights Violations and Corruption. Amara called Officer Louise to her the following morning. Workplace. He had gained her trust, and she needed someone she could rely on. She showed him the footage. His response was visceral but wordless, fist curled, teeth clenched. Then, after a protracted silence, Hess stated, "We have to let the town see this. They need to know the truth." Amara then I concurred. The municipality of Coldwater had its monthly community safety discussion on Sunday. Usually a dull, sparsely attended gathering held in the auditorium of the nearby high school. However, this time Amara produced the invitation certainly spread. Social media posts, flyers, and word of mouth through small businesses and local churches. Above all, she ensured that the journalists were present, as soon as the Amara didn't speak as the lights went down and the microphone clicked on. All she did was play the video. No preface, no commentary, only the uncut video. Silence, gasps, then like a sluggish tide, murmuring rose. Some yelled while others sobbed. A single female Amara didn't flinch, but she put both hands over her face and murmured, "That's my cousin's case." She waited. "This is your police department, and this is why it has to change," she finally remarked as she took the microphone. The turning of the settlement of Coldwater was the fifth detonation. It was now indisputable what had been whispered. The public's confidence had been shattered, and Amara had presented the evidence to the populace in their native tongue. Video truth, voice. Amara formally complained to the state by Monday. Office of the Attorney General. A joint investigation. Task team was established, and 4 policemen were put on administrative leave. Obtaining comments from people, internal witnesses, and previous detainees. There was further proof. Numerous repressed grievances, some of which were almost 10 years old, were discovered. The dots joined with frightful ease. Patterns of coercion and harassment, retaliatory patrols, fabricated evidence, and confessions. There weren't any negative equals. The culture was made to keep people quiet. The source of the 6th flashpoint was the officers. A group of junior employees, primarily women, Latinos, and black officers, asked to meet with Amara in private. There, they told, one by one, their accounts, how their grievances were ignored, and how promotions were offered like bait before being withdrawn when they declined to join the program. Rachel Thomas, a rookie cop, was the last to speak. Even when her voice wavered, her words were as loud as thunder. "Serving people is why I entered this department, who resemble my relatives. On the first day, however, I was instructed to disregard the sob stories and adhere to quotas. I've considered giving up. Each day since." Amara had up till now nodded. "You don't need to give up. You simply will support you, but you'll need to fight more strategically." Quickly, word got out that something new was growing in frigid water. A culture of honesty, change, and decency. However, even the righteous change has repercussions. Someone cut the tires on that vehicle that night. A message was keyed into the driver's side of Amara's unmarked vehicle. A traitor. She refrained from informing the media about it. In the morning briefing, she made no mention of it at all. Her tires were replaced and continued to walk because someone who has already experienced worse doesn't respond well to intimidation. The seventh detonation, the week's last flashpoint, occurred when Amara got an encrypted file from a former prosecutor is now a whistleblower. Within it, a memo that was released by the former CEO, Glay himself described a discretionary infantry tactic to be applied in election cycles. It directed police to make more arrests in a certain zip code. Codes with a history of low voter turnout and inadequate legal counsel. Under the guise of law and order, it was targeted suppression. Amara was standing in her office window with coffee in one hand and the printout in the other. This was more than just a dysfunctional department. This was a bus that is institutionalized and covered under a flag. Furthermore, it was now her duty to burn it from the ground up. After giving the memo one final glance, she placed it in the fireproof evidence bag next to her desk. She muttered, "I didn't come here to clean the house. To construct a new one I came, and for the first time in Coldwater's recent history, the silence outside her office was not one of fear. It seemed to be the lull before something greater started. It was estimated that the entire sweep would take 6 months. Less than 3 minutes were needed. Amara was in frigid water when she initially arrived, anticipated to delve into levels of dysfunction. Buried beneath bureaucracy and red tape are lies. What she discovered, however, was not buried. It was open, unapologetically, and methodically up, and now it was in the spotlight for the first time. However, change is not a linear process. It contorts, it strikes back. Itoposes. On a Tuesday morning, the twist occurred. Amara had recently completed her debriefing with DOJ field liaison, who was clearly startled when her assistant knocked on the door. She passed a manila folder to the chief and whispered, "You need to see this." There were 2 printed screenshots. The first was a cropped and altered photo of Amara from her undergraduate years that suggested she had formerly belonged to a well-known activist organization that conservative media deemed radical. The second was a fraudulent email claiming that Amara had received from a phony DOJ address, manipulated the audit to gain a political post. The report was posted on a right-wing blog by noon. Coldwater's new chief is accused of targeting cops, calling it a radical plant. With assistance from the federal government. It reached 3 local radio stations by 2 p.m. by nightfall, outside the precinct. Demonstrators gathered, yelling, "Resign! Amara, resign!" while brandishing thin blue line flags. The tension inside the building was nuclear. Now, officers who had remained impartial were being pressured to choose a side. Despite being suspended, Captain Brewer's supporters were fostering a rumor-external campaign, portraying Amara as a political pawn used to undermine legitimate law enforcement. The term reverse racism began to circulate via anonymous tip lines. The story was evolving, not predicated on facts, but anxiety. Amara remained unflinching. The following day, she called a press conference. Good morning. There was only one camera, a folding chair, a file box with names in it, and no teleprompter or podium. "I heard the noise," she started. "The headlines are visible to me. People have referred to me as radical, unfit, and even criminal. Let me clarify, though. What this department permitted to occur for years is criminal. What is illegal is steady lives lost, the evidence buried, and the jobs gained via quiet." The file box was then opened by her. She lifted a stack of folders and said, "These are actual instances, real people, victims of power abuse, racial profiling, and police wrongdoing. Additionally, if when I defend them, I become controversial, and conflict is inevitable." The video was taken, circulated, it quickly became viral. Amara, however, wasn't vying for praise on social media. She was battling for institutional transformation. Pressure was generated by the viral moment, but the legal retaliation was only getting started. She received a subpoena a week later. Several past officers filed a civil lawsuit, supported by a politically connected legal fund. alleging that she had created a hostile work environment and suspension for retaliation without due process. The goal was obvious: secure her with a tie, hands in court, deplete her resources, make her seem unstable, and it nearly succeeded. On the day when the court date was revealed, a local journalist in the parking lot, cornering her. "Prepare the microphone. Will you be stepping, Chief Lewis? Down as this lawsuit is being handled?" Amara didn't stutter. She stated that if the truth upsets people they ought to have, when given the opportunity, they behaved better. But she knew this was risky behind closed doors. Legal pressure used as a weapon was a well-known strategy that prevented reform from taking hold. She required a counterattack. It originated with someone she didn't expect. Lewis brought a folder titled "Payroll Adjustments" into her office. It was harmless enough, but there was no financial report inside. It was a chronology of unofficial settlements, and internal reimbursements are included in the category of discretionary budget changes. They weren't processed. They totaled more than $750,000 and were off books. Spanning 6 years. "These are not errors," Louise stated. "They are payments for silencing." Additionally, among those black teenager names, the daughter of a former Coldwater councilman who had been unjustly imprisoned for lingering for 9 hours close to the town's drugstore. No fees, no calls to family. However, a month later, her mother received $15,000 designated as community grant assistance. Slowly, Amara closed the file. The last turn wasn't only that the law had been broken by Coldwater's leadership. The cover-up was institutionalized, documented, and using euphemisms. It presented rewards as investments in the community. Accountability wasn't simply rejected. It was purchased and interred. That was altered. Everything. Amara summoned DOJ officials before a special oversight hearing, civil rights lawyers, and state auditors. Now she wasn't just asking for assistance. She was making a federal receivership. As a last measure, it was a nuclear option that would put the entire department under outside authority. The reaction was instantaneous. It was presented by conservative media as a government coupon. Local business associations objected, saying it would cause instability in the economy. However, the town was divided for the first time, not in allegiance, but in consciousness. People were listening. Voices that had not spoken before. Elders in the neighborhood, former police officers, and previous victims started attending meetings of the city council. They called names, told tales, and called for change. The lawsuit was dismissed within a few weeks. Amara's group demonstrated that the faked email chain originated from a private network that was supported by a former relative of the constable. The college photo was a complete fake. And the clamor quickly subsided as the truth was revealed. The demonstrations dwindled. The blog withdrew its story. Additionally, a state judge decided in Amara's favor, describing the countersuit as a calculated effort to threaten a public official who was implementing reform. However, the last punch, the one that originated outside of a court filing or press room and genuinely changed the essence of Coldwater. It was said by a teenager. Naomi, a 17-year-old girl, interrupted the following community forum. "I didn't think anyone would ever believe me when I said I was followed," she remarked, her hands shaking. Touched while at a stop. "My mother advised me not to cause any fuss, because they could say I was lying, but Chief Lewis didn't simply accept my story. She looked into it. Prevented them from touching anyone again." Amara wept for the first time in that high school gym, but not loudly or loudly, only a single subdued tear trickling down her face theatrically, because for Naomi, Louise, and others, this was about redemption, not retaliation. It was about giving the emblem a new meaning for everyone who had been silent for too long. By the end of the department's leadership structure was destroyed, and Coldwater PD was placed under joint oversight for a month. A Community A civilian board was established to examine all incidents of misbehavior in the future. Amara, she returned to work without taking a victory lap. New training regimens, weekly public forums, officer mental health programs, trauma-informed policing. She wasn't constructing a department. She was building a model. Required body cams with cloud-locked backup. And communities throughout the region began calling. She demonstrated that reform was possible, not because she was flawless. WS and single quote T a myth. All it took was bravery, discernment, and an unwavering dedication to justice. Additionally, frigid water, which was formerly disregarded, feared, and forgotten, has evolved into a framework for responsibility. Justice seldom happens that quickly, especially when it comes to cold water. Although the scars are decades old, the silence was unquestionably a change. The streets that had been silent when a police car pulled up were now empty. Rolled by now, resounding with genuine inquiries concerning training, equity, dignity, and what it truly means to serve and protect. And at the heart of it all was a lady named Chief Amara Lewis, who had entered a hostile precinct by themselves, been made fun of, ridiculed, and tarnished, and continued to let the truth speak for itself, never raising her voice. The agency held its first community openness day 6 months after the initial audit, and it wasn't just for the media. Or optics. It was about revealing the truth. In the gym, tables were arranged. Of the nearby middle school. Officers, not merely high-ranking officials. Student addition to posters outlining the rules on the use of force, de-escalation training, and the timetables for the civilian complaint process. Since it was no longer about her, Amara stood in the back, observing rather than giving orders, and that's how she knew Theoboy, who was hardly more than 9 years old, approached the Meet Your Officer's booth, holding a sketch that had stick figures and a crayon image. "That's you," he said, pointing to a black woman wearing a badge in the middle, handing it to Amara. He added shyly, "My mum says you made the bad cops leave." Grinned and knelt next to him, saying, "Your mother is correct, but we didn't just make them go. For you and everyone else, we're constructing a better place there." Because that was always point. It was always about transformation rather than takedown. Resignation or retaliation are the two extremes that far too frequently characterize police reform stories. But Amara didn't quit, and instead of seeking retribution, she restored the system that attempted to demolish. She gave cold water something it hadn't had in a long time, transforming her from the inside out. Have faith not only in the law, but also in the notion that the law could belong to everyone, not just the people who have the cleanest uniforms or the loudest voices. Indeed, some people still harbored animosity towards her. They grumbled as she passed by, and other officers chose to leave rather than adjust. Traditional systems don't disappear without retaliating, but they didn't win because individuals stayed, including Naomi, Louise, and the kid who drawings of police leaders. They got up and dressed. At one point, a local reporter questioned Amara, "When did you realize it was effective?" She did not mention the policy changes, the audits, or the indictments. "There was a night weeks into all of it," she added. "Around 1 a.m. as I left a precinct, it was silent, dark, me alone on my way to my automobile. Additionally, I had never seen this elder black man before, cross the street in my direction previously." I stiffened slightly. "You're aware of what he said?" "I'm not scared," he said. "Of you, not anymore. I've never said that about a badge before." Then he moved on, tipping his hat. During the interview, she paused and said, "I realized something significant had begun at that precise moment, because power isn't only what you carry, it's the things you leave behind." Amara left behind more than just rules and regulations. She left evidence behind, that policing with accountability, justice without showmanship, and leadership without ego are more than just catchphrases. They are feasible, but only if we cease requesting authorization. Only when we begin by listening and don't stop pushing. Coldwater will always remember the day she showed up without a badge. Title, merely a reserved woman passing by jeers and taunts. Additionally, they will never forget the moment they discovered her true identity. She was more than just the new leader. The pivotal moment was her.